The Project TT had some issues last week. I had to pull over specifically because my coolant warning light came on. Now this is something you never really want to happen, and especially when you're in the middle of pretty much nowhere, like on a mountain. The first thing I did was pull over and double check the level of the coolant. The first issue I could eliminate was the coolant level sensor itself. The coolant was definitely low, so I knew that that was not going to be the issue. Since we were going down a hill, the coolant was just below the minimum line, but it's still a lot lower than it really should have been. I made the decision to limp it home since there was coolant in the system and it wasn't low enough that I would consider putting water into it instead. And they definitely did not sell German coolant at the ski resort. While I was driving home, I paid special attention to the coolant temperature. The last thing I wanted was for this car to genuinely overheat on a mountain. The coolant temperature level on the dash stayed at the perfect temperature. But these are known to be faulty, so I wanted to double check that this wasn't the problem. I had another excuse to use one of this car's coolest features, which is the Climate Control 49C temperature reader. It's basically like a built-in OBD2 gauge for this car that's run through the climate system. It's really cool. And the good news is this dash pod was accurate. This car was not overheating. Since both of these matched, I could tell that the gauge pod was still working. And that wasn't the issue, which also makes sense since we were actually low on coolant. But that didn't answer the question as to where is it going. The next thing we need to do is figure out where this coolant actually went. The first thing I did when I got home was to confirm the level of the coolant. The coolant was indeed below minimum. In my mind, that left 3 different options for where this coolant could have went. The simplest answer would be that there was a bubble somewhere in the system. This was a suggestion by a few subscribers and a mechanically minded neighbor of mine. The theory was that the bubble was somewhere in the heater core. I updated the coolant system and replaced all the fluid roughly 8 months ago. That was about the time when I stopped using the heater because it was warming up outside. Well, now it's getting colder outside and I've started to use the heater again. So if the bubble was in the heater core, then this would have maybe pushed it out. And going up that prolonged of an incline followed by a decline could have also coerced the bubble. Now, I'm not really that sure how likely this situation is, since I've driven the car for multiple months since then, and the bubble would have had to have been hiding for just as long. But I definitely would not complain if the answer was something as simple as that. The next option is quite straightforward. There is a leak somewhere. All the janky lines were replaced though. The third option is the most unfortunate, but also the least likely. Somehow and somewhere, the coolant is being consumed internally. And that can happen in a number of ways, including a blown head gasket or a lifted head, which I think are most likely not the case. But on the off chance that we can't confirm that it was either a leak or a bubble, we're definitely going to escalate the testing to see if it's something like this. The car drives completely fine though, so I really don't think that's the case. Let's talk about how I'm testing for these first 2 cases. It's rather simple. After I confirmed the low coolant, the first thing I did was look under the car and all throughout all of the coolant line connections for any sort of moisture or something that looked like a leak. I upgraded all my rubber coolant lines to silicone and my plastic coolant hoses into aluminum. So naturally, I really didn't find any sort of a leak. That doesn't mean there isn't one though. This could have happened quite a while ago and we only noticed it because we were going up an incline, making the level low enough to trigger the sensor. So what I did was top the car off with coolant and let it sit for a couple days, coming back to check if there was anything under the car. There were no signs of a leak still, so all the signs were pointing to some sort of a bubble. Now that doesn't eliminate stuff being consumed internally. Sitting is not a very strenuous situation for the car, so I decided to drive it for a week and see if the level changed. I checked every single day for the level of the coolant and made sure it didn't deplete no matter how much I drove it and how hard I pushed the car. If the level lowered or the light came back on, we would escalate our investigation into the issue. And if the level didn't change, then we would assume that it was some sort of a fluke like a bubble in the system. At that point, we would just keep an eye on it and hope it does not come back. Looks like the coolant in the TT didn't actually drop after we topped it off, and I've been driving it all week in all ranges of conditions trying to get it to drop. So my guess is there was either a bubble or maybe it had to do with the pressure, but more than likely there was a bubble in something like the heater core. We're gonna keep an eye on it and we'll draw conclusions as we do more testing on the car. I'll still probably do an exhaust gas dye test on the coolant, but for now I think we're just gonna keep an eye on it and make sure that things are tip-top shape. So all in all, this is pretty good news. The car didn't consume any coolant no matter how hard I pushed it. I'll keep monitoring the car over the next few weeks and update you guys if I find anything new about it. So now let's get into the exciting stuff for today. Something really cool happened and it took me completely by surprise. And this story actually starts with our other project car, the S4. We just finished doing an entire series wrapping and transforming the exterior of this car using VVivid vinyl. I'm still blown away by this, but apparently VVivid themselves saw that series and enjoyed it enough to send me vinyl for the TT. Yeah, what? The thought of this happening never even crossed my mind, but it's literally one of the coolest things that has ever happened to me. To say I am both incredibly grateful and utterly excited would be an understatement. Honestly, this works out way better than it has any right to because I always wanted to wrap the TT. If you're a long-term subscriber, you know I've been talking about doing that since I pretty much bought the car. And if you're new to the car, you might be wondering, why would I want to wrap the TT? Well, I noticed a lot of the paint was peeling, and then I started to look into that a little bit deeper because I've only seen clear coat peel before, and it turns out there is a two-stage paint, probably the original paint, underneath the paint that's on the car. So the previous owner resprayed this paint with a single-stage OEM color, and that's why it's never been that glossy. This was my working theory, so I started to look for evidence, and then I found a bunch of areas where there's a lot of overspray, so I don't think it was even painted that carefully. But we can remedy this by either wrapping it or getting a really cool paint job. For now, I think wrapping it is by far and away the best option. Take a look at this. This is a really good angle to see that the paint that's on the car almost has a matte finish when compared to the paint that's underneath it. Thankfully, a solution has presented itself. But unlike the S4, I am not going to leave you guys in the dark on my color picking process. VVivid sent me samples of the colors that I think would be most interesting. Today we'll go through all the samples that I requested. I'll go through my favorites and I want to hear about yours. These are the 5 samples I think would best suit this car. You can get a rough idea of what they look like on the roll, but it's not going to match what you can get by actually installing them on something. So the plan here is to take a section of each of the vinyl colors, adjust them, and put them onto the hood of the car so that we can see what they look like on the actual item we're going to be wrapping. Then we'll see if we like any of them, and if we do, we'll go ahead and order some. It'll be pretty cool. Each one of these colors changes depending on what kind of light you're looking at it in, so you'll get a view of it in both overcast and sunny conditions to get a better idea of what you like. We'll also go over any quirks or interesting features of each of the vinyls. But first, we've got to get them on the car. For now, we mostly care about what the colors look like on the surface more so than the actual quality of installation itself. So I'm not going to wet sand or worry that much about dust underneath. It also ends up getting a bit cold, so I cut off the edge of one of them just so it sits a little bit flatter. In the real situation, I would have heated it, but today, we just care about the color. Now these vinyls can be broken up into two different distinct categories, the Ultra Gloss line and the other ones. The whole goal of the Ultra Gloss line is to mimic the finish of paint, with multiple layers and what looks to be a clear coat finish. That line is a lot harder to install because you need a truly smooth surface, so we'll have to wet sand the entire vehicle, so you get some seriously good reflections. The other three options are your more traditional vinyls. They focus on a gorgeous base color with a ton of metal flake. Here's what they all look like. Getting color-accurate video of these vinyl wraps is incredibly difficult because they are all so different, as well as the lighting keeps changing. I made sure to get some of these shots with each and every one of my cameras that I use for these videos so that you guys know what they're going to look like if we wrap the whole car in that color. I don't think we could really go wrong with any of these. I am going to be honest though, I do have two that I like more than the rest. My number one right now is the Nightshade Purple. I absolutely love the gold metal flake in the deep purple, and it reminds me a lot of an OEM Plus version of the Merlin Purple that this car came in. And I always like OEM Plus colors. My second favorite is the China Blue. It's ultra gloss, so it would be a little bit more difficult to install, but I think it would be really cool to have this muted pastel blue on this car. That's not to say that I don't like the other colors, however. I think each one is really cool in their own right, though the Smurf Blue would definitely make the car look like an M&M. Keep in mind when picking your color that I plan on putting more carbon fiber accents on the car. I am so excited to hear what you guys think this car would look best in. I am honestly speechless. I genuinely can't thank VVivid enough for being willing to send me out vinyl to test on this car. I really do feel honored. So if you're watching VVivid, thank you. It really does mean a lot to me. I've got some really fun plans for this car for the upcoming winter, and by the end of it, it's not gonna look or perform like it does currently. It's gonna be better in both ways. I really hope you're as excited as I am. I want to say thank you so much for watching. Your guys' support means the world to me, and I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to watch my video. If you enjoyed the video, learned something, or want to see more, consider dropping a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.